fourth voyage to the Cape the Victoria Falls and 6 weeks north of the Zambesi 44, we propose now to go on and cross the Zambesi just below the Victoria Falls. I should like to have the spray of the water over the carriages. Letter from the Right Hon. C.J. Rhodes to E.S. Grogan, Esquire, September 7, 1900. 45. These words came to my mind as I sat under the veranda of one of the newly thatched huts, which formed the camp of the native commissioner at Livingston, Victoria Falls, on a glorious morning early in July, 1903, gazing at one of the fairest landscapes to be seen on God's earth. I was ostensibly occupied with my mail home, but the paper lay in all its virgin whiteness before me, while my eyes feasted on the marvellous panorama stretching away to the south, east and west. My heart sank as I realised how difficult, nay, impossible it would be for anyone with only a very limited vocabulary and very moderate powers of description to convey to those far away even a limited idea of this glorious vision of these vivid colourings, intensified by the lonely grandeur of the whole scene and the absence of human habitations. Constitution Hill, as the aforesaid camp had been christened, was situated on high ground, 4 miles to the north of the then drift of the Zambesi River, which again was several miles above the actual falls themselves. With the advent of the railway and of the magnificent bridge now spanning the mighty river, that drift has actually fallen into disuse, but at the time of our visit it was the scene of much activity, and quite a nest of stores, houses and huts had sprung up near the rough landing stage on the north side. As transport, not only for individuals and for every ounce of food required by the vast country stretching away to the north, but also for the huge and valuable machinery, boilers, boats in sections, etc., destined for the various mining companies. The only means of maintaining communication with the struggling but promising new colony were one very rickety steam launch and one large rowing boat, beside a few canoes and native dugouts. A fine steam barge, which would greatly have facilitated the passage of all kinds of merchandise, had most disastrously slipped its moorings during one stormy night of last wet season, and had not since been seen, the presumption being that the relentless stream had carried it to the mighty cataract, which, like a huge ogre, had engulfed it for all time. But this disaster had not caused anything like consternation among the small community to whom it meant so much, and the thought occurred to one how remarkable are the qualities of dogged perseverance, calm disregard of drawbacks and of any difficult task before them, which makes Englishmen so marvellously successful as pioneers or colonists. The precious barge for which they had waited many weary months had disappeared, and there was nothing more to be said. Such means as remained were made the most of. Owing to this calamity, however, the stores on the north bank were well-nigh run out of their usual stock, but I was amazed to find such luxuries of life as eau de cologne, scented soaps, ladies' boots and shoes, and brightly coloured skirts. Leaving the small river township the embryo Livingston, we followed a very sandy road uphill till we reached the summit of Constitution Hill, already mentioned. There our buggy and 2 small, well-bred ponies swept into a smartly kept compound surrounded by a palisade, the feature of the square being a flagstaff from which the Union Jack was proudly fluttering. As a site for a residence, Constitution Hill could not well be surpassed, and many a millionaire would cheerfully have given his thousands to obtain such a view as that which met our eyes from the humble huts, and held me enthralled during the whole of my stay. It must be remembered we had been travelling, since leaving the railhead, 80 miles north of Bulawayo, through a thickly wooded and mountainous country where any extensive views were rare. Even when nearing the Zambesi, with the roar of the falls in one's ears, so little opening up had hitherto been done that only an occasional peep of coming glories was vouchsafed us. Hence the first glimpse of a vast stretch of country was all the more striking. I must ask my readers to imagine the bluest of blue skies, an expanse of waving grass of a golden hue, resembling an English cornfield towards the harvest time, stretching away till it is lost in far distant tropical vegetation of intense green, which green clearly marks the course of the winding Zambesi. Again, amid this emerald verdure, patches of turquoise water, wide, smooth, unruffled, matching the heavens in its hue. Are to be seen no touch of man's hand in the shape of houses or chimneys, to mar the effect of nature and nature's colouring. If you follow with your eyes this calm, reposeful river, now hiding itself beneath its protecting banks with their wealth of branching trees, tall coconut palms, and luxuriant undergrowth, now emerging like a huge blue serpent encrusted with diamonds. So brightly does the clear water sparkle in the sun, you note that it finally loses itself in a heavy, impenetrable mass of green forest. And now for a few moments the newcomer is puzzled to account for a dense white cloud, arisen apparently from nowhere, which is resting where the forest is thickest and most verdant, now larger, then smaller, anon denser or more filmy, but never changing its place, never disappearing, while the distant thunder, to which you had almost got accustomed, strikes upon your ear and gives the explanation you are seeking. Yes, that white cloud has been there for centuries, and will be there while the world lasts, in spite of trains, bridges, etc. It marks the Victoria Falls, and is a landmark for many miles round. How amazed must the great Livingstone and his intrepid followers have been to see this first sign of their grand discovery after their weary march through a country of dense forests and sandy wastes, the natural features of which could not in the least have suggested such marvels as exist in the stupendous river and the water power to which it gives birth. When mentioning that great explorer whose name in this district, after a lapse of nearly 50 years, remains a household word among the natives, handed down from father to son, it is a curious fact, and one that should prove a lesson to many travellers from the old world as well as from the new, that only on one tree is he believed to have cut his initials in Africa, and that tree stands on the island in the centre of the Zambesi, the island that bears his name, and that absolutely overhangs and stems the centre of the awe-inspiring cataract. I must now try in a few words to give a short account of what we saw at the Victoria Falls in July 1903, when the breath of civilization had scarcely touched them. Today they are easy of access, and the changes that have been wrought have come so swiftly that, no doubt, recent visitors will scarcely recognize the localities of which I write. I must first ask such to be lenient with me, and to follow me down the sandy road leading from the Constitution Hill compound to the controller's camp on the bank of the river, about 2 miles nearer the falls. There were to be seen a collection of huts and offices, where the controller conducted his important business of food purveyor to the community, and a government inspector of cattle had equally arduous duties to perform. I must mention that, owing to disease in the south, cattle were then not allowed to cross the Zambesi, and horses and dogs had to be disinfected before they were permitted to leave the south bank. Their troubles were not even then over, as they had to be swum across the river, and owing to its enormous width, the poor horses were apt to become exhausted halfway over, and had to be towed the rest of the way, their heads being kept out of the water, an operation attended with a certain amount of risk. It followed that very few horses were crossed over at all, and that these animals in northwestern Rhodesia were at a premium. From the controller's camp I had another opportunity to admire the river itself, just as wonderful in its way as the falls, and I remember thinking of the delights that might be derived from boating, sailing, or steaming on its vast surface. Since that day, the enterprising inhabitants have actually held regattas on the mighty stream, in which some of the best-known men in the annals of rowing in England have taken part. But 7 years ago our river trip was attended with mild excitements. The small skiff, carrying our party of 6, was an excessively leaky canoe, which had to be incessantly bailed out to keep it afloat, and wherein, notwithstanding our efforts, a deep pool of water accumulated, necessitating our sitting with feet tucked under us in Oriental fashion. Hence I cannot say we realized to the full the enjoyments of boating as we know it at home in far less beautiful surroundings, or as others know it there at the present time. The principal features that struck me were, first, the colossal width of the river. As we gazed across the translucent surface, reflecting as in a looking-glass the fringe of trees along the edge, the first impression was that your eyes actually perceived the opposite bank. But we were undeceived by one of the residents, who observed that was only an island, and that there were several such between us and the north side. Secondly, we marvelled at the clearness of the water, reflecting the blueness above, and thirdly, at the rich vegetation and the intense green of the overhanging foliage, where the graceful and so rarely seen palms of the Boracious tribe were growing to an immense height. All was enhanced by the most intense solitude, which seemed to accentuate the fact that this scene of nature was indeed as God left it. These reflections were made as we floated on in our rickety canoe to a creek, where we landed to walk to the actual falls. A new path had just been cut in the wooded part of the north bank, and we were almost the first visitors to profit by it. Formerly, the enterprising sightseers had to push their way through the scrubby undergrowth, but we followed a smooth track for 2 miles, the roar of the cataract getting louder and louder, with only occasional peeps of the river, which was fast losing its calm repose and degenerating into restless rapids hurrying on to their bourne. Now and then a buck would dance across our path, pause affrighted for an instant at the unusual sight of man, and bound away again into the thickness beyond. And once 3 fine warthogs almost stumbled into our party, only to gallop away again like greyhounds before the rifles, which were carried by the black boys behind, could be made use of. At last we emerged suddenly, without any warning, on the northern extremity of the cataract, which at this point measures over a mile from bank to bank, but of which only about a quarter of that distance is visible, owing to the blinding spray. It is well nigh impossible to describe a scene of such wonder, such wildness. It is awe-inspiring, almost terrible in its force and majesty, and the accompanying din prevents speech from being heard. Standing on a point flush with the river before it makes its headlong leap, we gazed first on the swirling water losing itself in snowy spray, which beat relentlessly on face and clothes, while the great volume was nosily disappearing to unknown and terrifying depths. The sightseer tries to look across, to strain his eyes and to see beyond that white mist which obscures everything, but it is an impossible task, and he can but guess the width of the falls, slightly horseshoe in shape, from the green trees which seem so far away on the opposite bank, and are only caught sight of now, and then as the wind causes the spray to lift. At the same time his attention is fixed by a new wonder, the much-talked-of rainbow. Never varying, never changing, that perfect-shaped arc is surely more typical of eternity there than anywhere else. Its perfection of colours seems to be reflected again and yet again in the roaring torrent, and to be also an emblem of peace where all is turmoil. We were hurried away to remove our wet rainproof coats and to